Late nights had always been my time, a serene period when the world quieted down and life felt manageable. Working odd hours meant my schedule rarely aligned with normal routines, but I'd come to appreciate the solitude of midnight grocery runs and empty parking lots. However, one night at Walmart changed everything, leaving me haunted by the memory. It was around 3 a.m. when I pulled into the Walmart parking lot. The store was one of the few still open 24 hours, a rare convenience for someone with my erratic schedule. The lot was nearly deserted except for a few scattered vehicles that I assumed belonged to employees. I parked halfway between the entrance and the far end of the lot, close enough to feel safe but not too close to stand out. Inside, the store was eerily quiet. The fluorescent lights hummed softly, casting a pale glow over the wide aisles. A few employees were stocking shelves, their chatter muffled by distance. I grabbed a basket and headed straight to the snack aisle, craving something to keep me going until morning. As I wandered through the snacks, debating between chips and trail mix, I felt it for the first time, the unsettling sensation of being watched. I glanced up, scanning the aisle, but it was empty. Shaking off the feeling, I grabbed a bag of trail mix and turned into the next aisle. That's when I saw him. At the far end of the aisle stood a man. He was tall and lanky, dressed in a black Adidas sweatshirt with the hood pulled up. His posture was stiff, his face partially obscured, but his gaze was unmistakably fixed on me. For a moment, I thought he might be looking at something on the shelf, but as I moved, his eyes followed. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. Trying to dismiss it as a coincidence, I walked to another aisle, picking up my pace slightly. Yet, as soon as I turned the corner, he appeared again, peeking around the edge of the aisle, his expression blank. Maybe he's just shopping, I told myself, though the unease gnawed at me. I decided to head toward the back of the store, thinking I could lose him if I made enough random turns. But no matter where I went, he was always there. His movements were slow and deliberate, as if he were playing some sort of twisted game. Each time I glanced back, he was closer. My heart began to race. This wasn't normal. I wasn't just imagining it, he was following me. I clutched the trail mix in my hand like a lifeline and made a beeline for the checkout area. There was only one lane open, manned by a cashier who looked half asleep. I told her about the man, my voice trembling, but she only nodded absently and muttered something about keeping an eye out. As I paid for my items, I scanned the store, looking for him. For the first time, he was nowhere in sight. Relief washed over me as I grabbed my bag and headed for the exit, but I couldn't shake the tension in my chest. The parking lot loomed ahead, dimly lit and sprawling. I quickened my pace, glancing over my shoulder every few steps. When I reached my car, I fumbled with my keys, my hands trembling. Sliding into the driver's seat, I locked the doors and took a deep breath. "It's over," I whispered to myself, trying to calm the adrenaline coursing through my veins. Then I saw him. He was sprinting out of the Walmart, heading straight for my car. His speed was unnerving, his movements frantic yet purposeful. For a split second I froze, my brain struggling to process what was happening. Then instinct kicked in. I started the engine and slammed the car into drive, my tires screeching as I sped out of the parking lot. In the rearview mirror, I saw him chasing me, his figure growing smaller as I put distance between us. Even when I turned onto the main road, I couldn't shake the image of him running, his arms pumping furiously, as if he could somehow catch up to a speeding car. By the time I got home, I was a mess of nerves. I double-checked the locks on my doors and windows before collapsing onto the couch, too shaken to sleep. Who was he? I kept asking myself. What did he want? The following days were uneventful, but the memory of that night lingered. I avoided that Walmart, opting for stores closer to home during daylight hours. I convinced myself that it was an isolated incident, a random encounter with a strange, possibly unstable individual. A few weeks later, I was driving home late again after another long shift. My route took me past the Walmart parking lot, and curiosity got the better of me. I slowed down, scanning the lot for any signs of him. It was mostly empty, save for a couple of cars near the entrance. Then I saw it. Parked in the far corner of the lot was a car I didn't recognize. Inside, illuminated by the faint glow of a nearby streetlight, was a figure slumped in the driver's seat. Something about the posture struck me as wrong, too still, too undepth. I pulled into a spot a safe distance away, my pulse quickening as I debated whether to investigate. Summoning my courage, I stepped out of my car and approached cautiously, keeping to the shadows. As I got closer, I noticed the windows were slightly fogged, as if someone had been sitting inside for hours. Peering through the glass, I felt my stomach drop. The driver's seat was empty. Before I could react, I heard the crunch of gravel behind me. Whipping around, I came face to face with him. His hood was down this time, revealing hollow eyes and a gaunt face twisted into a sinister smile. "I've been waiting for you," he said, his voice low and rasping. Panic surged through me. I turned and bolted toward my car, my breaths coming in ragged gasps. He didn't shout or chase me this time. Instead, I heard the slow, deliberate sound of footsteps following me. The measured pace was somehow more terrifying than a full sprint. I reached my car and yanked the door open, diving inside and locking it in one motion. Fumbling with the ignition, I glanced up to see him standing a few feet away, his head tilted as he watched me with an unsettling calmness. The engine roared to life, and I sped out of the lot, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly they ached. In my rearview mirror, I saw him standing there, growing smaller as the distance between us widened. Yet, despite the miles I put between us, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd never truly escaped. That night, sleep eluded me. Every sound, every shadow seemed amplified, a reminder of his presence. Days turned into weeks, but the fear never faded. I avoided that area entirely, but deep down I knew it wasn't over. Then, one evening, I came home to find my front door ajar. The house was dark, the silence oppressive. My heart pounded as I stepped inside, clutching my keys like a weapon. "Hello," I called out, my voice trembling. There was no response. I moved cautiously from room to room, turning on lights and checking every corner. Nothing seemed out of place, but the air felt heavy, charged with an unseen menace. In the living room, I found a single item left on the coffee table. It was the same bag of trail mix I'd bought that night at Walmart, unopened but unmistakable. My hands shook as I picked it up, dread pooling in my stomach. On the back, written in jagged letters, was a message. "You can't run forever." The room seemed to close in around me as the realization hit he'd found me, and he wasn't done. It happened last year on what seemed like an ordinary weeknight. I had gone to my local Walmart, as I often did, to pick up a few things. The store was quiet, eerily so. It was around 8 or 9 p.m., and I had been inside for about 15 minutes, casually browsing the aisles. At the time, I was in the fitness section, inspecting one of those massage guns. I wasn't planning on buying it that night, but I'd been toying with the idea for a while and decided to read the details on the box. The stillness of the store was comforting at first, a peaceful contrast to the usual hustle and bustle of daytime shopping. That peace was broken when faint voices drifted in from the next aisle. It sounded like a man and a child. I paid no attention at first, assuming it was just a parent and their kid. But then I heard the man say, "I'll buy you this toy if you come with me." I froze. It wasn't the words themselves, but the tone, a strange mix of coaxing and urgency that caught my attention. My first instinct was to dismiss it. He's probably the child's father, I thought. Still, something gnawed at me. Moments later, the man's voice came again, this time more insistent. "Your mom said it's okay. Come on, let's go." A cold wave of unease washed over me. It was the kind of instinctual alarm that's hard to ignore. What if he wasn't the child's father? What if something was wrong? Trying to appear casual, I stepped out of my aisle and peered into the next. At the far end, I saw them, a man in a black jacket and a winter hat holding the hand of a little girl. She couldn't have been older than 5 or 6. Her small frame was dwarfed by the towering shelves of toys around her. The man was leading her away, his movements deliberate but quick. "Excuse me," I called out, my voice steady despite my racing heart. The man turned, his expression a mix of surprise and irritation. Up close, his appearance was disheveled, scruffy beard, darting eyes, and a forced smile that didn't reach his face. Grabbing a random stuffed animal from the shelf, I walked toward them. "Do you think this would make a good gift for my niece?" I asked, forcing a friendly tone. He hesitated, his eyes narrowing. I don't know," he mumbled, clearly flustered. I knelt slightly to meet the girl's gaze. "Is this your dad?" I asked gently. Before she could answer, the man interjected, his voice tight. "No, I'm just watching her for a moment." He tugged at her hand. "We really need to get going." Every instinct in me screamed that something was wrong, but I wasn't sure what to do. I watched them leave the aisle and headed in the opposite direction, trying to convince myself I was overreacting. Maybe he really was just helping. Maybe I was paranoid. Not even a minute later, I heard a woman's voice, trembling and frantic. "Sarah? Sarah?" The sound made my stomach drop. Following the voice, I found a woman a few aisles over. She was scanning the area with wide, desperate eyes, clutching a half-empty shopping cart. "Is Sarah your daughter?" I asked. She nodded, her face pale with fear. She was just here. I turned for 1 second. That terrible feeling came rushing back, sharper this time. "I think I saw her with a man," I said quickly. They were heading toward the front of the store. Without another word, we bolted toward the self-checkout area. My heart was pounding, my mind racing with what-ifs. What if we were too late? What if he had already left with her? To my immense relief, we spotted them. The man was standing at one of the self-checkout machines, holding a toy in his hand. The little girl, Sarah, stood beside him, looking confused but not distressed. "Sarah," the woman cried, her voice breaking. The girl's head whipped around, her eyes lighting up as she saw her mother. "Mommy," she shouted, breaking free from the man's grip and running toward her. The man's face twisted in panic. He stammered something about buying the toy for her, claiming he was just trying to be nice. No one believed him. He glanced around, realizing he was cornered, and bolted for the exit, leaving the toy behind. Sarah's mother scooped her up, tears streaming down her face. Meanwhile, store staff were alerted, and the police were called. The man didn't get far. They caught him just outside in the parking lot. He didn't resist, but offered no explanation either. You'd think that would be the end of the story, but it wasn't. The events of that night haunted me long after the initial shock wore off. The man's face, the way he moved, it all stuck with me. There was something deeply unsettling about him, something that went beyond the immediate danger he posed. Months later, I was scrolling through local news when a headline caught my eye: "Man arrested in connection with child abductions." The article included a mugshot, and my stomach turned. It was him, the man from Walmart. He wasn't just some creep, he was a predator, linked to multiple disappearances in the area. As I read the details, a cold realization washed over me. That night I hadn't just helped reunite a lost child with her mother. I had interrupted something far darker. But the story didn't end there. Weeks after seeing the article, strange things started happening. At first it was small. A car parked near my house that I didn't recognize. A figure standing too long at the end of my street, seemingly watching. Then, one night I came home to find my front door slightly ajar. Nothing was stolen, but the feeling that someone had been inside was undeniable. The final straw came one evening when I was walking to my car in the Walmart parking lot. It was late, the lot mostly empty. As I unlocked my car, I felt that same creeping unease I had felt that night in the store. Turning, I saw a man standing several rows back, partially obscured by a parked truck. He wasn't moving, just watching. I got in my car and locked the doors, my hands shaking as I started the engine. When I looked up again, he was gone. But in the days that followed, the sense of being watched never left me. Some nights I wake up to the sound of faint tapping on my windows, but when I look, there's nothing there. I keep telling myself it's just the wind or my imagination. But deep down, I know better. Some nightmares don't end when you wake up. Some horrors linger, waiting in the shadows. And sometimes they follow you home. I'm a woman in my late 20s, and I work a standard office job Monday through Friday. One of my favorite hobbies is cooking, so I make dinner for myself almost every night. To keep things fresh, I go grocery shopping every couple of days, usually stopping at a Walmart near my apartment. It's just a mile away and right on my way home from work. Walmart is convenient, and they typically have the best prices, so it became my go-to. This story takes place just a few months ago, and it still sends shivers down my spine. Like usual, I had stopped at Walmart after work to grab some ingredients for dinner. It was a routine I didn't think much about. I'd park, quickly pick up a few things, and head home. On one of these visits, a man in a Walmart vest greeted me near the produce section. He was a bigger guy, bald with a small dark beard, and seemed friendly enough. He asked how my day was going. We exchanged a few pleasantries, and I thought nothing of it. The next time I visited, the same man greeted me again, this time asking slightly more personal questions like if I was coming from work. Over the next few weeks, it became a pattern. Every time I visited Walmart, he was there. It felt like he was always waiting near the produce section, striking up conversations that got a little more personal each time. He'd ask things like where I worked or where I lived. I was starting to feel uneasy, but I convinced myself he was just being friendly, until the day things took a strange turn. I was doing my usual shopping when he approached me again. This time, after some casual conversation, he asked for my phone number. The request caught me off guard. I politely declined, trying to keep things civil, but his reaction was startling. His whole demeanor shifted. He looked offended and didn't say another word. He just turned and walked away abruptly. I tried to shake it off and continued shopping. About 10 minutes later, I checked out and headed to my car. As I walked through the parking lot, I noticed the man sitting in a car not far from mine. My heart sank. I couldn't tell if he was looking at me or not, but something felt off. I quickly got into my car and started driving home. That's when I realized he was following me. At first, I thought it might be a coincidence, but as I made the turns toward my apartment complex, his car stayed right behind mine. Panic started to set in. When I reached my complex, I didn't pull into my usual parking spot. Instead, I drove around the lot, hoping to shake him off. His car trailed mine the entire time. I knew I couldn't go home. I didn't want him to know where I lived. Thinking quickly, I left the complex and headed for a busier road. It was rush hour, and the traffic worked to my advantage. I waited for just the right moment, then pulled out into traffic, cutting it close enough to cause the car behind me to honk. The man had no chance to merge, and I lost him in the chaos. My heart was racing, but I was furious. I drove straight back to Walmart and marched into the customer service counter to report the man. When I described him and explained what had happened, the employee's response made my stomach drop. They told me no one matching that description worked there. The man wasn't an employee. He must have gotten a Walmart vest somewhere. Maybe he worked there in the past or bought one online. Either way, he had been posing as an employee. I was horrified. The staff assured me they'd keep an eye out for him, but that didn't do much to ease my fear. I carefully drove home, scanning every car around me. Thankfully, I didn't see him again. Since that day, I've avoided that Walmart entirely. It's been months, and I haven't seen the man again, but I still get nervous whenever I think about it. You never know who might be watching or what their intentions could be. Stay aware and trust your instincts.